The forest smelled of ash and damp earth, a sharp tang that clung to Aurelia's skin as she crouched beside a fallen pine. Her gloved hands worked swiftly, coaxing a trembling fawn from a tangle of blackened roots. The wildfire had retreated days ago, but its scars lingered: charred trunks, scorched earth, and the faint crackle of distant embers. This was her first rescue mission in 3 years, a rare call from the wildfire department that had pulled her from her city life back to the wilderness she'd once called home. At 32, Aurelia felt the old rhythm return, her muscles remembering the dance of saving what the flames had spared. Her radio hissed, spitting static. "Aurelia, you got that fawn secure?" The voice belonged to Mitch, the grizzled team leader who'd known her since she was a teenager volunteering with the crew. "Almost," she called back, her voice steady despite the ache in her knees. The fawn's eyes, wide and glassy, locked onto hers. "Easy, little one," she murmured, slipping a soft harness around its trembling frame. Her fingers brushed its flank, warm and fragile, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, her and this small life she could still save. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a jarring intrusion. She ignored it, focusing on the fawn. It buzzed again, insistent, and she sighed, pulling it out with one hand while keeping the harness steady. The screen glowed with a text from Jerome, her husband of 6 years. Her heart gave a small, foolish leap. She had from him in days, his photography gigs keeping him on the road. Maybe he was checking in, asking how the mission was going. The message was 3 lines long. "We're done, Aurelia. I want a divorce. Papers are at the house." Her breath caught, sharp as a blade. The words blurred, then sharpened, each syllable a pinprick against her skin. She read it again, then a 3rd time, as if repetition might rewrite the truth. The fawn stirred, nudging her hand, and she forced herself to move, securing the harness with mechanical precision. Her mind spun, grasping for context. Jerome had been distant, sure, his trips to the city more frequent, his calls shorter. But divorce? By text? Another buzz. A second message. "Bank accounts cleared. Needed it for the transition. You'll manage." The air felt heavier, pressing against her chest. Their joint account, years of her savings, scraped together from long hours at the vertical farming company, from the part-time gigs she'd taken to build their future, was gone. She pictured Jerome's crooked smile, the one that had once made her feel like the only woman in the world. Now it felt like a mask, hiding something colder. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. A scream clawed at her throat, but she swallowed it, tasting ash. She typed 2 words, deliberate and final. "I see." She hit send, then shoved the phone back into her pocket. The fawn bleated softly and she stroked its ear, grounding herself in its warmth. There would be time for anger later. Right now there was work to do. The memory came unbidden, sharp as the forest's smoky haze. 8 years ago, she'd been 18. The summer air hung heavy with the scent of alfalfa and dust as Aurelia pushed through the diner's screen door, her hard hat tucked under one arm. At 19, she was all lean muscle and quiet confidence, her face smudged with soot from a morning spent rescuing a litter of raccoon kits from a smouldering barn. The diner, a weathered outpost along the highway that cut through her small town, was a familiar refuge: checkered linoleum, the clink of coffee mugs, the jukebox humming a twangy ballad. She slid into a booth, her wildfire department uniform rumpled, and ordered a root beer, unaware that her life was about to shift. The bell above the door jingled, and a stranger walked in, his city polish stark against the diner's faded charm. He was tall, with dark hair swept back, camera slung around his neck, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk. When they landed on Aurelia, they lingered, a spark of interest flaring. He approached, his smile easy, practiced. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, not waiting for an answer as he slid into the booth. "I'm Jerome, photographer. You look like a story worth telling." Aurelia raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching into a smile. "A story? I'm just grabbing a drink." But his attention, warm and focused, stirred something in her, a curiosity she hadn't felt before. He asked to take her picture, and though she laughed, brushing off the flattery, she agreed, letting him snap a few shots as sunlight streamed through the window, catching the amber in her eyes. They got to talking, and when she spoke of her work, nursing orphaned fawns, bandaging owl wings, her voice lit up, words tumbling out like a river unleashed. Jerome listened, his camera forgotten, his questions drawing her out. "I'm in town a few days," he said as she stood to leave. "Can I see you again?" She hesitated, her small-town instincts wary. "Maybe," she said, her smile cautious but genuine. That was the start. A spark she didn't yet know would burn her. Aurelia had grown up on her family's farm, a sprawling patch of fields and woods where animals were as much kin as neighbours. Her childhood was spent trailing deer through the forest, learning their paths, their fears. School was high school and a vocational program in animal care, but the wildfire department was her true education. She'd started volunteering as a kid, bottle-feeding orphaned kits, and by 17 they'd asked her to stay on. She did, becoming a full-time wildlife rehabilitator, her hands skilled at mending what the flames broke. The work was her pulse, her purpose, until Jerome's arrival stirred a different kind of longing. He stayed true to his word, lingering in town for 3 days. He found her at the rehab center, snapping photos as she coaxed a hawk from a crate, her focus unbroken. "You're incredible," he said, his lens capturing her in a moment of quiet strength. Her family, steeped in conservative values, frowned at his advances. "City boys don't stick," her mother Monica warned, her voice sharp with distrust. Aurelia agreed, keeping Jerome at arm's length, her heart guarded by the lessons of a close-knit community. But Jerome was different, or so he seemed. When she rebuffed him, he didn't push, just smiled and promised to write. He left for the city, but the rejection gnawed at him. Jerome was used to getting what he wanted, his charm a key that unlocked doors. Aurelia, though, was a puzzle, her authenticity a challenge he couldn't resist. So he changed tactics, trading brash pursuit for patience. Letters arrived, handwritten, each one praising her work, her spirit. He sent photos, her with the hawk, her laughing by a stream, each a mirror of her strength. When he returned months later, he joined her rescues, his camera documenting her as she saved a fox kit from a snare. "I'm serious about this," he said one evening, his voice soft as they sat by a campfire, the forest alive around them. "About you." Aurelia's defences wavered. She'd told him they were from different worlds, she a village girl who belonged with the wild, he a photographer chasing city lights. "What happens if we get serious?" she asked, her eyes searching his. "I can't live in your world. This is where I belong." "I'll follow you," he said, his hand on hers, his gaze unwavering. "Wherever you are, that's home." The promise swept her away, a tide she couldn't resist. She let herself fall, believing his sweetness, his willingness to kneel in the mud beside her, was love. They started dating, Jerome's persistence wearing down her doubts. He was sweet, attentive. When he proposed a year later under a sky thick with stars, she said yes, her heart full. They married in a simple ceremony, her in a borrowed dress, him in a suit that looked too sharp for their town. Life was happy, a dream she hadn't dared imagine. Jerome kept his word, staying in her town, setting up a small studio in their rented cottage. She worked at the rehab center, he shot local events, and their evenings were filled with laughter, her cooking, his stories of the city. But the dream frayed. Within months, Jerome's trips to the city grew frequent, his photography gigs pulling him away. "It's just work," he'd say, kissing her forehead before leaving. Aurelia missed him, but she trusted his promise. Then Monica, her mother, sat her down one evening, her face stern. "You can't live like this, Aurelia. Him there, you here. A wife follows her husband, makes him happy. That's your duty." The words sank deep, rooting in Aurelia's upbringing. She didn't want to lose Jerome, didn't want to fail as a wife, so she made the hardest choice of her life. She left the rehab center, her passion, and found a job in the city at a vertical farming company, one that occasionally involved animals. The city was loud, grey, a cage compared to her woods, but she told herself it was for love, for their future. Jerome welcomed her, his smile bright, and for a while they were close again. She didn't see the calculation in his eyes, the way he'd shaped her choice to fit his world. She believed they were building something together, not knowing she was building a life he'd one day dismantle. Back then, at 25, she was still adjusting to the city's rhythm, its honking cabs, its crowded sidewalks, its sky too cluttered with lights to show stars. But moving here had fixed things, or so she thought. Jerome was home more often, his photography gigs now local, and their evenings were filled with shared meals, his laughter, her hopes for a future that felt close enough to touch. She'd traded her forest for this, and for a while it seemed worth it. The apartment was small but hers, sage green walls she'd painted herself, a windowsill lined with herbs, a couch where she and Jerome curled up to watch old movies. She'd left her wildlife rehabilitation work behind, her mother's words echoing. A wife follows her husband. The job at the farming company was steady, occasionally involving animals when they consulted on urban beekeeping or pest control, but it wasn't the wild. Still, Aurelia poured herself into it, her hands itching for purpose. Her real dream, though, was a family. Children running through a house, their laughter like the chatter of forest birds. She'd shared this with Jerome one night, her voice soft as she traced his hand. "A big, warm family," she'd said, smiling. "That's what I want." He'd nodded, his eyes warm but distant. "Sounds perfect, Ori. But we need to be stable first. Money, a bigger place. Kids aren't cheap." His practicality made sense, so she agreed, suspending her dream for a future he promised was coming. She worked harder, took a part-time job cleaning offices on weekends, her savings growing in their joint account. Every dollar was a step toward the family she envisioned, a life where she could teach her kids to love the wild as she did. She didn't know Jerome wasn't on the same page, that his promises were as empty as the city's starless sky. 6 years slipped by, a blur of routine. Aurelia rose at dawn, worked her shifts, came home to cook, clean, and wait for Jerome. His photography career had taken off, his portfolio now filled with glossy shots of models and urban landscapes. His gigs often took him to other cities, Chicago, Miami, Los Angeles, and he'd return with stories of galleries and clients, his suitcase spilling with wrinkled shirts. Aurelia would wash them, pack him fresh clothes, and send him off with words of support. "You're doing amazing," she'd say, kissing his cheek, believing her role was to bolster his dreams as he'd once bolstered hers. At some point she realized it didn't matter where they lived. Jerome's lifestyle was motion, a constant chase for the next big shot. The city hadn't tethered him. It had freed him to roam, leaving her as the fixed point he returned to. She understood, or told herself she did. He loved the setup, her steady presence, her warm meals, her faith in him. It was a comfort he craved, a base that let him soar. She didn't see how he used her, how her devotion was a convenience, not a partnership. While she saved for their future, he spent freely, his receipts showing dinners and hotels she assumed were for work. While she dreamed of children, he photographed models, his lens lingering too long, his nights not always spent alone. He'd probably known he'd discard her one day, but the time hadn't come. She was still useful, still the loving wife who made his life easy. Aurelia's days were a cycle: work, home, wait. The farming company was fine, but her heart ached for the forest, for the feel of fur under her hands, the trust in an animal's eyes. She kept a small sketchbook, drawing foxes and hawks from memory, her pencil a lifeline to the girl she'd been. The call from the wildfire department came like a gust of fresh air. It was early spring, 6 years into their marriage, and Aurelia was folding Jerome's laundry when her phone rang. The voice was familiar. "Mitch, her old team leader. "Got a bad fire up north," he said. "We're short-handed. Could use your hands with the animals." Her heart leaped, a spark of the old fire. She hadn't worked a rescue in years, but the pull was instant, undeniable. "I'm in," she said, her voice alive with a joy she'd almost forgotten. Jerome was in Seattle, due back in a week. She texted him about the mission, expecting his usual encouragement. His reply was brief. "Sounds good. Be safe." She packed her gear, boots, gloves, her old hard hat, and left for the forest, her spirits soaring. For the first time in years, she was doing what she loved, kneeling in ash to save lives, her hands remembering their purpose. She didn't know Jerome saw her absence as an opportunity, a chance to end things swiftly. While she cradled fawns and bandaged wings, he was moving Vanessa into their home, forging her signature, emptying their account. The divorce text, when it came, would shatter her, its timing a cruel mystery. Why now, after all she'd given up? After the forest she'd left, the family she'd delayed, the self she'd buried to make him happy? The dawn broke grey over the forest, mist curling through the skeletal remains of burned pines. Aurelia knelt beside a stream, splashing icy water on her face to shake the fog of sleeplessness. The wildfire rescue camp buzzed faintly behind her, radios crackling, volunteers shouting coordinates, the low hum of a generator. Her hands trembled as she cupped the water, not from cold but from the weight of Jerome's texts, which had burned into her mind like the fires that scarred this land. Divorce. Bank account emptied. A life dismantled in 2 messages. She dried her hands on her cargo pants and checked her phone, half hoping for a retraction, an apology, anything to soften the blow. Instead, an email from their bank waited, confirming a 0 balance. Another notification followed, a social media tag from a mutual acquaintance. Curiosity nudged her to click, and her stomach twisted. The photo showed Jerome at their city apartment, his arm around a woman with sleek blonde hair and a smug smile. Vanessa. The caption read, "New beginnings." The timestamp was yesterday. Aurelia's breath hitched. Their home, the one she'd painted sage green where she'd hung curtains to catch the morning light, was now Vanessa's stage. She scrolled further, each post a fresh cut. Vanessa lounging on their couch. Vanessa's shoes by their door. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. A deliberate erasure of Aurelia's place in Jerome's world. She locked the phone, her jaw tight, and stood, the stream's gurgle drowning out the pulse in her ears. She wouldn't unravel here, not with animals depending on her. The morning's work was grueling. Aurelia and the team scoured a charred hillside, searching for survivors. She found a rabbit, its fur singed but alive, and cradled it to a crate, her hands steady despite the storm inside. As she worked, her mind churned. Jerome hadn't just taken their savings. The truck, a battered pickup her father had given them as a wedding gift, was another loss she hadn't yet processed. She'd loved its quirks, the sticky clutch, the faint smell of hay in the upholstery. During a break, she sat on a crate sipping bitter coffee from a thermos. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a voicemail from her bank's fraud department. She played it on speaker, keeping the volume low. The voice was clipped, professional. "Ms. Thompson, we've flagged unusual activity on a loan application in your name. Please contact us immediately." Loan? She hadn't applied for one. Her heart sank as the pieces clicked. Jerome hadn't just emptied their account, he'd forged her signature, likely on more than one document. The truck's title, the loan. How far had he gone? She deleted the voicemail, her fingers cold. She needed help, someone who could see through Jerome's smoke and mirrors. That's when she thought of Lila. They'd met a decade ago, volunteering together at the wildfire department. Lila, with her sharp wit and knack for finding lost things, keys, pets, once even a missing hiker, had left to become a private investigator. If anyone could untangle Jerome's mess, it was her. Aurelia dialed, her voice low to avoid the team's ears. "Lila, it's Aurelia. I need you. A pause, then Lila's familiar drawl. Well, damn, girl. Been what, 3 years? What's up? Aurelia exhaled, the words spilling out. The divorce text, the emptied account, Vanessa, the loan. Lila listened, her silence heavy with understanding. When Aurelia finished, Lila's tone was all business. He's a snake, but snakes leave trails. Give me a day. I'll dig. Discreetly, Aurelia said. He can't know I'm looking. Discreet's my middle name. Hang tight, and don't let him get in your head. Lila hung up, and Aurelia felt a flicker of relief, like the first breath after diving too deep. The memory of Jerome's promises surfaced, uninvited. We'll have it all, Ori, he'd said, his camera clicking as she laughed. She'd believed him, trading her wildlife job for a city desk. She shook off the memory and joined the team for the afternoon sweep. The forest was eerily quiet, the air thick with the ghost of smoke. As she scanned a gully, her eyes caught a small shape huddled beneath a scorched bush. A wolf cub, its grey fur matted, one paw curled protectively against its chest. Her heart surged. Wolves were rare here, their packs dwindling with each fire season. She approached slowly, her voice soft. Hey, little one. Let's get you safe. The cub's amber eyes met hers, wary but curious. She extended a gloved hand and it didn't flinch. Carefully she lifted it, feeling its fragile warmth against her chest. Luna, she whispered, the name coming unbidden. It felt right, like a promise. She carried Luna to the triage tent, her steps lighter despite the day's wait. Saving this cub wouldn't undo Jerome's betrayal, but it was a start, a tether to the woman she'd been before him. That evening, Aurelia sat in her tent, the canvas walls glowing faintly from a lantern. Aurelia's phone lay on her sleeping bag, its screen dark. She'd resisted checking it, knowing each notification would be another wound. But curiosity won, and she opened her email. A message from the bank confirmed the loan, $50,000, secured against their apartment. Her name was on every document, her signature a clumsy imitation. Fury flared, then cooled into something sharper. Jerome thought he'd outsmarted her, but he didn't know her anymore. Maybe he never had. She typed a quick message to Lila. Check the truck title, too. He's forging more than loans. The forest camp was a patchwork of shadows under a sickle moon, the air sharp with pine and the faint char of yesterday's fires. Aurelia sat cross-legged in the triage tent, her hands steady as she adjusted the bandage on Luna's paw. The wolf cub's amber eyes followed her every move, a quiet trust forming in their gaze. The tent's canvas flapped softly, muffling the distant chatter of volunteers winding down for the night. For the first time in days, Aurelia felt a flicker of calm, as if Luna's small, fierce life could anchor her against the chaos Jerome had unleashed. Her phone, tucked in her jacket, stayed silent. She'd turned off notifications after the bank's voicemail, unwilling to let more bad news invade this fragile sanctuary. But the weight of Jerome's actions, divorce by text, their emptied account, Vanessa in their home, the forged loan, pressed against her like a bruise. She stroked Luna's fur, her mind drifting to the man she'd married, the one who'd once seemed to see her soul. How had she missed the cracks in his charm? A sharp buzz broke her reverie. Her phone, despite her precautions, lit up with a message from Lila. Aurelia hesitated, then opened it, her pulse quickening. Got something on your boy. Call me. Secure line. She glanced at Luna, who'd curled into a tight ball, then stepped outside, the night air biting her cheeks. She dialed Lila, keeping her voice low. Talk to me, Aurelia said. Lila's tone was grim. Jerome's not just a cheat, he's a pattern. I pulled some records. 2 women, both photographers' assistants. He cozied up, drained their savings, then ghosted. One filed a complaint, but he paid her off. He's good, Aurelia. Slippery. Aurelia's grip tightened on the phone. And now? He's working the sympathy angle, posted online about how you neglected him, left him no choice but to move on. Vanessa's backing his story, playing the doting girlfriend. They're framing you as the bad guy to cover the money grab. Aurelia's stomach churned. She pictured their mutual acquaintances, colleagues from her city job, Jerome's art scene friends, swallowing his lies. What else? The truck title's in his name now. Forged, like the loan. I'm tracing the loan's origin. Looks like he funneled it to an offshore account. I need more time, but he's not as smart as he thinks. Left digital footprints. The next morning, Aurelia rose with the dawn, the forest camp cloaked in a mist that softened the scars of the wildfire. Her muscles ached from yesterday's work, but she welcomed the soreness, a reminder of her purpose. She pulled on her worn boots and joined the team at the edge of a charred ravine. She knelt beside a fallen log, her fingers gentle as she lifted a pair of owl fledglings, their feathers singed but hearts still beating. "You're tougher than you look," she murmured, placing them in a crate lined with soft cloth, their wide eyes a fleeting distraction from the weight of Jerome's betrayal. Tara, the raspy-voiced volunteer, worked nearby, her gloved hands untangling a rabbit from a snare. "You're a machine today, Aurelia," she called, her grin half hidden by a bandana. "What's got you so fired up?" Aurelia managed a tight smile, brushing dirt from her knees. "Just glad to be back," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside. She didn't mention the divorce text, the emptied bank account, or the photo of Vanessa in her home. As the sun climbed, burning off the mist, the team paused for a break near a stream, its gurgle a soft counterpoint to their chatter. Aurelia sat on a mossy rock, her water bottle cold against her palm, and checked her phone hoping for an update from Lila. Instead, a message from Karen, a co-worker from the vertical farming company, glowed on the screen. "I'm so sorry, Aurelia. I had no idea things were so bad between you two. If you need to talk, I'm here." Attached was a screenshot of Jerome's post, a photo of him and Vanessa, arms entwined with a caption, "Finding peace after a rough chapter. Grateful for new beginnings." The words stung, sharp as a thorn, proof that Jerome's lies were taking root. Aurelia's throat tightened, her fingers hovering over the reply button. She pictured Karen in the office break room, her kind eyes clouded with pity, whispering to others about Aurelia's failed marriage. Jerome's narrative was spreading, painting her as the neglectful wife, the reason for his departure. She deleted the message, her jaw clenched, but the hurt lingered, a bruise on her heart. Tara plopped down beside her, unwrapping a granola bar. "Want a spill?" Aurelia shook her head, forcing a laugh. She took a sip of water, the cold biting her tongue. "You ever deal with someone who rewrites your whole story to make themselves look better?" Tara snorted, crumbs falling from her bar. "My ex tried that. Told everyone I was a nag because I asked him to pay rent. People believe what's loudest, not what's true." At the camp's makeshift office, Aurelia sat at the laptop, her fingers hovering over the keys. Jerome had always been careless with security, scribbling passwords on scraps of paper he hid in plain sight, under a desk lamp, inside a book. She'd teased him about it once, back when she thought his quirks were endearing. Now they were her leverage. She logged into a cloud account they'd once shared for household bills, hoping he hadn't changed the password. The screen loaded, and her pulse quickened. There it was, a folder labelled taxes. Innocent enough, but Jerome had always been sloppy with naming. She clicked, finding a trove of emails he'd forwarded to himself, bank statements, loan applications, even a scanned copy of the truck title with her forged signature. Her chest tightened at the sight of her name, scrawled in a hand that wasn't hers. But this was proof, a crack in his armor. One email caught her eye, sent to Vanessa 2 weeks ago. "Make sure the bank gets the loan docs by Friday. She won't notice." The casual, "She's in deeper than we thought." Then, on impulse, she drafted a fake email from a non-existent bank representative, questioning a discrepancy in the loan application. She sent it to Jerome's personal address, knowing he'd see it before Vanessa. A seed of doubt, just enough to make him sloppy. At the triage tent, she checked on Luna. The cub's paw was healing, her movements stronger. Aurelia fed her a syringe of milk, smiling as Luna's tongue flicked eagerly. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" she said, her voice soft. The cub's warmth against her hand sparked a memory, not of Jerome but of her teenage self, bandaging a fox kit under her father's watchful eye. She'd been fearless then, certain of her place in the world. Jerome had dimmed that certainty, but Luna was reigniting it. A text from Lila arrived as Aurelia cleaned the syringe. "Vanessa's not just arm candy. She's got a history, petty fraud mostly, but she's smart. Helped Jerome with the forgeries. Also, your fake email worked. He's panicking, calling the bank. Keep it up." Aurelia's lips curved, a rare smile. Jerome's panic was her opening. She texted back. "Any luck on the offshore account?" Lila's reply was quick. "Working on it. Sit tight." The news fueled her. She slipped to the camp's library tent, a quiet corner with a single computer and shelves of field guides. There, she searched public records for Vanessa, cross-referencing Lila's leads. A court filing from 3 years ago popped up. Vanessa had been fined for forging checks. Small time, but it fit. She was Jerome's perfect accomplice, willing to bend the law for a payout. Aurelia saved the file, her mind racing. If she could tie Vanessa to the loan, she'd have leverage to flip her against Jerome. The city loomed like a steel cage as Aurelia's bus rolled in, its skyline jagged against a bruised dusk. She adjusted Luna's crate on the seat beside her, the wolf cub's soft breathing a steady anchor. The bus hissed to a stop and she stepped onto the sidewalk, the air thick with exhaust and the hum of neon signs. She hailed a cab, giving the address of the apartment she'd shared with Jerome. Her stomach tightened as the cab wove through traffic, the city's pulse a stark contrast to the forest's quiet strength. Aurelia stood at the entrance, her reflection faint in the glass door. She looked different now, her face tanned from days in the field, her eyes sharper like Luna's. She buzzed the apartment, half expecting silence. Instead, Vanessa's voice crackled through. "Who is it?" "Aurelia," she said, her tone even. "I'm here for my dad's things." She reached the apartment door and knocked, her heart a steady drum. It opened, and there stood Vanessa, blonde hair swept into a bun, her smile tight as a wire. Behind her, Jerome lounged on the couch. "Ori," he said, his voice smooth, the old nickname a blade. "Didn't expect you to show up. Thought you'd be licking your wounds." She stepped inside, setting Luna's crate by the door. The apartment felt alien, Vanessa's touches everywhere, new cushions, a vase of lilies. Aurelia's sage-green paint was still there, a ghost of her presence. "I'm here for my father's box," she said, her gaze locked on Jerome. "Then I'm gone." He stood, his movements lazy, confident. "You're taking this well. I figured you'd be a mess, after everything." His eyes flicked to Luna's crate, a smirk tugging his lips. "Still playing hero with strays, huh?" Aurelia ignored the jab, scanning the room for the box, her father's fishing tackle, his old watch, letters he'd written her as a kid. She spotted it in a corner, half buried under Vanessa's scarves. "That's it," she said, moving toward it. Jerome stepped closer, his voice low. "Let's be reasonable, Ori. You don't want to fight. I can cut you a deal. Half the loan money, clean slate. You walk away, no cops, no lawyers." She paused, her hand on the box. His offer was a trap, a last-ditch play to keep her quiet. She straightened, meeting his gaze. "Reasonable? Like forging my signature on a $50,000 loan? Or the truck title?" She saw Vanessa flinch, a crack in her poise. "Or maybe you mean the offshore account you thought I wouldn't find?" Jerome's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" She pulled the USB drive from her pocket, holding it up. "Bank records, emails, Vanessa's forged signatures. I've already sent copies to the fraud department. You're not as clever as you think, Jerome." Vanessa gasped, stepping forward. "You can't." "I can," Aurelia cut in, her voice steel. "And I did. The bank's auditing everything. You might want to call your lawyer, Vanessa. Those emails you sent Jerome, they're not as private as you thought." Jerome's face darkened, But he recovered, his charm sliding back into place. "You're out of your depth, Ori. You think you can scare me. You're just a small-town girl who got lucky with me." She lifted the box, its weight familiar, grounding. "Lucky? I gave up everything for you, my work, my home, myself. But you didn't count on me taking it back." She moved to the wall where a photo hung, one Jerome had taken years ago, her in her volunteer gear, a hawk on her glove. She slipped it into her jacket. "This isn't yours anymore." Vanessa sputtered, but Jerome stayed silent, his jaw tight. Aurelia picked up Luna's crate, the cub stirring inside. "The police will be in touch," she said, turning for the door. "Enjoy your new beginning." Outside, the city pulsed on, oblivious to the war she'd just fought. Aurelia set the crate on the sidewalk, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. She opened the box, finding her father's watch nestled among lures and letters. She slipped it onto her wrist, its ticking a quiet promise. Luna whined softly, and Aurelia crouched, stroking her through the bars. "We did okay, didn't we?" Her phone buzzed, a text from Lila. "Bank's moving fast. Found the offshore account. Jerome's freaking out." "You good?" Aurelia typed back. "Better than good." The wildlife centre was an hour away where Luna would get the care she needed. After that, Aurelia would return to the forest, to the work that had always been her North Star. The wildlife centre smelled of hay and antiseptic, a soothing contrast to the city's metallic tang. Aurelia sat on a wooden bench in the recovery ward, Luna's crate at her feet. The wolf cub gnawed a strip of raw meat, her amber eyes bright with newfound strength. The centre's hum, soft barks, the clink of medical tools, volunteers' muffled voices, wrapped Aurelia in a cocoon of purpose. Confrontation with Jerome and Vanessa still thrummed in her veins, not as pain but as power. Now, as she waited for a vet to check Luna, her mind turned to the next move in a game Jerome didn't know he was losing. Her phone vibrated, Lila's name flashing. Aurelia stepped into the hall where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and answered. "Tell me you've got something good." Lila's voice. "Your boy's house of cards is folding. The bank audited the loan docs, and they found a glitch. Your signature's on a form dated 3 years ago, but the notary stamps from last month. Total mismatch. They're tearing into everything now." Aurelia's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. How'd they miss that? "You didn't tell me you're a time traveller," Lila teased. "That form? You misdated it way back, probably some old habit. Jerome used it without checking, and it's biting him now. Cops are involved. He's sweating." A memory flickered. Her father's voice, gruff and practical, teaching her to backdate certain papers as a precaution, a rural trick to guard against disputes. She'd done it absent-mindedly on a few documents during their early marriage, never imagining it would become her shield. A smile tugged her lips. "What about Vanessa?" "That's the kicker," Lila said. "She's jumping ship. Sent me a batch of emails, stuff she and Jerome cooked up, including the truck title scam. She's angling for a deal, wants immunity. Guess loyalty's not her thing." Aurelia leaned against the wall, the cool plaster grounding her. Vanessa's betrayal was a mirror of Jerome's, a fitting twist. She's giving him up? Like a bad habit. I'm meeting her tonight to lock it down. Jerome's still clueless, planning some fancy photo show like he's untouchable. You want in on this? Aurelia glanced at Luna's crate through the ward's window. Not yet. I need to see Luna through. Keep me posted. The vet, a wiry woman named Doctor, Felix, arrived to examine Luna. Aurelia watched as she checked the cub's paw, her hands deft and gentle. She's healing fast, Dr. Felix said, adjusting her glasses. You've done good work. We'll take it from here. Aurelia nodded, a pang in her chest. Luna's recovery meant release soon, a step toward the wild where she belonged. Can I stay with her a bit longer? Dr. Felix's eyes softened. Of course, she trusts you. She left, and Aurelia opened the crate, letting Luna nuzzle her hand. A text from Lila interrupted her. Vanessa's singing. Gave us bank logins. Offshore accounts in Jersey, not Cayman. Sloppy move. Cops are circling. Photo shows tomorrow night. Want me to crash it? Aurelia typed back. Let him dig his hole. I'll be there when it's time. She set the phone down, her gaze on Luna, who'd begun to paw at the crate's bars, testing her limits. You're ready to run, aren't you? She murmured, a smile flickering. The city glittered like a broken promise, its lights smearing across the night sky as Aurelia stood outside the gallery. The venue, a sleek cube of glass and steel, pulsed with the chatter of art world elites, critics in tailored suits, models draped in silk, collectors clutching champagne flutes. Inside, Jerome's photography exhibition was in full swing, his name emblazoned on a banner above the entrance. Jerome Caldwell. Visions of Truth. The irony twisted Aurelia's lips into a faint smile. Truth was the last thing Jerome knew, and tonight, it would undo him. The gallery's windows offered a clear view of the spectacle. Jerome stood at the center, his charcoal suit pristine, his smile as polished as the floors. He gestured at a massive print, a cityscape, all angles and shadows, while a crowd nodded, entranced. Vanessa hovered nearby, her red dress a stark contrast to her pale, tense face. She'd betrayed Jerome to save herself, handing Lila the keys to his offshore account and forged documents. Aurelia's phone buzzed. Lila. Cops are in. Showtime. She slipped the phone into her pocket, her pulse steady. She'd chosen to stay outside, letting the law deliver the blow. Inside, the mood shifted. Two men in plain clothes, badges glinting under the gallery lights, approached Jerome. The crowd parted, murmurs rippling like a stone dropped in water. Jerome's smile froze, his hand pausing mid-gesture. One officer spoke, his voice inaudible from outside, but the effect was clear. Jerome's shoulders stiffened, his eyes darting to Vanessa, who looked away, her fingers clutching her purse. The second officer produced handcuffs and the room gasped, a collective intake of breath. Aurelia leaned against a lamppost, the cold metal grounding her. She watched as Jerome tried to charm his way out, his hands raised, his voice likely spinning excuses. But the officers were unmoved, guiding him toward the exit. The crowd buzzed, phones flashing as guests captured the scandal. Vanessa followed at a distance, her face a mask of panic, already distancing herself from the wreckage. The banner overhead seemed to mock Jerome now, his visions of truth exposed as a lie. The gallery doors swung open, and Jerome emerged, his wrists cuffed, his suit rumpled. The officers led him to a waiting car, its lights casting blue and red across the pavement. He glanced around, perhaps searching for an ally, but found only curious stares. The next morning, Aurelia returned to the wildlife centre, the air crisp with the promise of rain. Luna's crate sat in a sunlit corner of the recovery ward, the cub pacing, her paw nearly healed. Aurelia knelt, opening the door to stroke her fur. "You're almost ready, aren't you?" she said, her voice soft. Luna's eyes met hers, fierce and trusting, a mirror of her own resolve. The release plan was set, a remote forest where wolves still ran free. Letting Luna go would ache, but it was right, a step toward the wild they both belonged to. She sat back, her father's watch ticking softly. The news of Jerome's arrest had spread, his name splashed across art blogs and local headlines. Photographer charged in fraud scandal. The elite crowd he'd courted was already moving on, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. Aurelia felt no joy in it, only a quiet pity. Jerome's life had been a performance, built on lies and stolen trust. A shadow crossed the ward's doorway, and she looked up to see a man in a faded flannel shirt, his hands tucked into jeans pockets. He was lean, with dark hair greying at the temples and eyes that held a quiet weight. "You're Aurelia, right?" he said, his voice low, steady. "I'm Eli. Vet here. Dr. Felix said Luna's your project." She nodded, standing to meet his gaze. "She's a fighter. Paws almost healed." Eli crouched by the crate, his movements careful, like someone used to calming skittish creatures. Luna tilted her head, unafraid, and he smiled faintly. She trusts you. That's rare for a wolf. He checked her bandage, his hands deft, then glanced at Aurelia. You've got a gift. Felix says you used to do this full time. Years ago, she said, her throat tightening. Got sidetracked. She didn't mention Jerome, didn't need to. Eli's eyes held a knowing depth, as if he'd weathered his own detours. He stood brushing dust from his knees. Happens. Good to see you back. His tone was matter of fact, but there was warmth in it, an invitation to share more if she chose. She didn't, not yet, but his presence lingered as he left to check other animals, a quiet steadiness that felt like the forest itself. That afternoon, Aurelia joined Eli in the triage tent, where they treated a batch of new rescues, squirrels with singed tails, a fox kit with a sprained leg. Their work fell into an easy rhythm, her hands remembering the old motions as they bandaged and fed. Eli's calm focus grounded her, his occasional questions about her time with the wildfire department, her favorite rescues, drawing out stories she hadn't told in years. She spoke of saving a bear cub from a trap, her voice alive with a passion she'd almost forgotten. You light up when you talk about it, Eli said, cleaning a syringe. Why'd you stop? She hesitated, the weight of Jerome's shadow pressing in. Got married, moved to the city, thought it was what I was supposed to do. She paused, then added, he didn't want this life. Eli nodded, no judgment in his eyes. Takes courage to come back to yourself. His words were simple, but they landed deep, stirring a truth she was only beginning to name. She wanted to ask what had brought him here, what shadows he carried, but a volunteer interrupted with a question, and the moment passed. That night, Aurelia stayed late in the recovery ward. She'd spent the day wrestling with a decision, one that had crystallized during her work with Eli. Her city job at the vertical farming company, steady, soulless, was a relic of Jerome's world, a compromise that no longer fit. She wanted to return to wildlife rehabilitation, to the work that had always been her North Star. The thought scared her, starting over, rebuilding, but it also felt right, like Luna's paw knitting itself whole. Eli appeared, carrying 2 mugs of tea. Figured you'd still be here, he said, offering one. She took it, the warmth seeping into her hands. They sat on a bench, Luna's soft snores filling the silence. After a moment, Eli spoke, his voice low. Lost my wife 4 years ago. Car accident. Threw myself into work after, kept everyone at arm's length. This place, these animals, they brought me back. Aurelia's chest tightened, not with pity but recognition. I'm sorry, she said, meaning it. What was she like? Fearless. Loved horses, could outride anyone. He smiled, a flicker of light in his eyes. She'd have liked you. You've got that same fire. The words caught her off guard, warming her more than the tea. Eli nodded, and they sat in quiet companionship, the night weaving them closer. He didn't push, didn't charm like Jerome had. His presence was a steady current, letting her set the pace. As they talked, about Luna's release, the center's challenges, small moments of their pasts, Aurelia felt a connection take root, fragile but real. Eli wasn't a savior or a distraction. He was a mirror, reflecting her strength, her scars. The next morning, Aurelia drafted an email to her city boss, resigning her job. Her fingers trembled as she hit send, but relief followed, a weight lifting. The path was unclear, but it was hers. Forest stretched vast and untamed, its pines whispering secrets as dawn painted the sky in streaks of gold and rose. Eli stood beside her, his flannel jacket dusted with dew, his presence as steady as the ancient trees around them. Today was Luna's release, a moment Aurelia had both dreaded and craved. A goodbye that felt like a beginning. Eli adjusted the GPS tracker on Luna's collar, his hands careful. This reserve's perfect. Plenty of prey, a pack nearby. She'll find her way. Aurelia nodded, her throat tight. Luna's amber eyes met hers through the crate's bars, fierce and ready, a mirror of the fire she felt inside. "Go on, girl," she whispered, her voice catching. Luna turned, her eyes locking onto Aurelia's for a long moment, as if memorizing her. Then, with a flick of her tail, she bounded toward the trees, her form blurring into the underbrush. A faint rustle, a flash of grey, and she was gone. Aurelia stood, her breath shuddering. The forest seemed to hold its breath, then exhaled, birdsong resuming in the canopy. Eli stepped closer, his shoulder brushing hers. "You did good," he said, his tone soft but sure. "She's where she belongs." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "So am I." The words felt true, a declaration. Back at the van, Aurelia packed Luna's crate, its emptiness a strange comfort. She slipped the photo from her bag, tracing its edges. Eli started the engine, and they drove back in companionable silence, the mountains unfolding around them. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lila, tying up loose ends. Jerome's pleading guilty. "Vanessa's deal is solid. You're officially free." Aurelia smiled, pocketing the phone without replying. Freedom wasn't just the law's gift. It was this. Her hands that saved. Her heart that chose. With Eli beside her, the forest ahead, she was ready for whatever came next. A woman whole and unbound, her story hers to write. The conference hall hummed with anticipation, its high ceiling strung with banners proclaiming Wildlife Resilience Summit. Aurelia stood backstage, her hands steady despite the flutter in her chest. At 35, she was no stranger to crowds, but today felt different. She wore a simple blazer over jeans, her father's watch gleaming on her wrist, the old photo, her in volunteer gear, hawk on her glove, tucked in her pocket like a talisman. 3 years had passed since Luna's release, since Jerome's arrest, and the unraveling of his lies. Those years had rebuilt her, not into the girl she'd been, but into a woman who carried her scars as strength. The stage lights warmed her face as she stepped to the podium, the crowd's applause a soft wave. Scientists, activists, and volunteers filled the seats, their faces bright with shared purpose. Aurelia's nonprofit, Wild Haven, had grown from a fledgling idea to a national force, training rural communities to rescue wildlife during natural disasters. Today, she'd share their latest milestone, a network of trained responders across 10 states saving thousands of animals each year. But more than that, she'd share her story, a testament to rising from betrayal to build something lasting. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear, carrying to the back of the hall. "I'm Aurelia Thompson, and I'm here because of a wolf cub named Luna." The crowd leaned in, and she began, weaving the tale of Luna's rescue, her own journey through Jerome's deception, without naming him, and the fire that had forged her purpose. She spoke of her father, whose watch ticked on her wrist, and the forest that had taught her to fight. "Every animal we save," she said, "reminds us we can save ourselves too." The applause was thunderous, but Aurelia's eyes found a smaller figure in the front row. Maya, a 16-year-old volunteer with Wild Haven. Maya's dark braid and shy smile mirrored Aurelia's younger self, her passion for animals a spark waiting to blaze. Aurelia had met her a year ago when Maya joined a training session, her hands trembling as she bandaged a rabbit. Since then, Aurelia had mentored her, seeing in Maya the same hunger for purpose she'd once felt. Today, Maya would join her on stage, a symbol of the next generation. The idea for Wild Haven had taken root after Luna's release, when Aurelia returned to the Wildlife Center full-time. She'd trained under Dr. Felix, honing her skills, while Eli's quiet support anchored her. Their bond had grown slowly, rooted in late-night talks and shared rescues. He'd moved to a cabin near the center, and she'd joined him a year later, their life a tapestry of work and love, simple but profound. Together, they'd launched a project to track released animals, using GPS collars to study their survival. Luna's data had come in months ago. She was thriving, leading a small pack in the reserve. The news had felt like a blessing. A circle closed. Aurelia's days were full, training volunteers, securing grants, speaking at schools. But mentoring Maya had become her heart's work. The girl reminded her of the teenager who'd faced wildfires with nothing but grit and a first aid kit. Maya had her own struggles, a single mother, a rural town that felt too small, but her determination was fierce. Aurelia saw her potential, not just to save animals, but to lead, to carry Wildhaven forward. Backstage before the speech, Maya had fidgeted with her notes. "What if I mess up?" she'd asked, her voice small. Aurelia had smiled, squeezing her shoulder. "You won't. You know this work. Just tell them what it means to you." Maya had nodded, her jaw setting, and Aurelia had felt a surge of pride, as if passing a torch. Now, on stage, Aurelia introduced Maya, stepping aside as the girl took the podium. Maya's voice wavered at first, then grew steady, recounting her first rescue, a fawn caught in a fence, and how Wildhaven had given her purpose. "Ms. Thompson showed me I could do this," Maya said, glancing at Aurelia. "She showed me we can change things." The crowd applauded, and Aurelia's eyes stung, not with sorrow, but with the joy of seeing her legacy take root. The session ended with questions, the crowd eager for details on Wildhaven's methods. Aurelia and Maya answered in tandem, their voices a blend of experience and enthusiasm. As the hall emptied, Eli slipped backstage, his flannel shirt a familiar comfort. He carried a tablet with new tracking data, his eyes bright. "Luna's pack just had cubs," he said, showing her the map. "She's a mother now." Aurelia laughed, the sound free and full. "Of course she is." The news felt like a gift, Luna's strength echoing her own. She hugged Eli, his warmth a steady anchor. Their life wasn't perfect, long hours, tight budgets, but it was theirs, built on trust and shared dreams. He'd proposed last month, not with a ring but with a carved wooden wolf, a quiet promise. She'd said yes, knowing they'd face the future as equals. That evening, Aurelia and Eli hosted a small gathering at the centre, volunteers and locals mingling over coffee and pie. Maya was there, chatting with a ranger about internships, her confidence blooming. Aurelia watched from a corner, her heart full. Jerome's betrayal, once a gaping wound, was now a faint scar, its pain transformed into purpose. He was a footnote, serving time for fraud, his name forgotten in the circles he'd craved. Aurelia's name, though, was growing, not for fame but for impact. She stepped outside, the night air cool, the stars a brilliant scatter. The forest loomed beyond, its pulse a song she knew by heart. She thought of her father, whose letters she still read, and Luna, whose cubs now roamed free. Eli joined her, his arm around her shoulders. "Proud of you," he said, his voice soft. She leaned into him, smiling. "We did this together." And they had. Her, Eli, Maya, the countless hands that saved lives. Aurelia looked to the stars, her father's watch ticking, and dedicated her work silently. To him, to Luna, to the wild that had saved her.